Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes, where we take a deep dive into Midway, the battle that doomed Japan, penned by two former Imperial Japanese Navy officers, Mitsuo Fuchida and Masatake Okumiya. This isn't just, another historical account. It's a profound and frankly, at times really heartbreaking Japanese perspective on one of World War II's most pivotal naval engagements. What we're about to unpack for you is a story really steeped in strategic miscalculations, a surprising underestimation of the enemy, deep-seated hubris, and critical technological shortcomings that, well, ultimately led to Japan's devastating defeat at Midway.
And this deep dive promises a truly unique lens, I think, a way to view a defining moment of the Pacific War. We'll be exploring how an ingrained strategic dogma, a striking failure to adapt to the rapidly evolving nature of naval warfare, and a dangerous self-assurance contributed to a disaster that, well, effectively sealed Japan's fate. You'll hear how even a force that, on paper anyway, held a quantitative edge could be so thoroughly outmaneuvered and outfought when its most vital assumptions proved fatally, tragically wrong.
Right. Our mission today is to cut through that fog of war, to understand not just what happened at Midway, but crucially why it happened, and all from the first-hand accounts and detailed analysis provided by the Japanese participants themselves. What's so compelling here is the raw honesty, really, of their reflections. It offers truly illuminating insights into the inner workings and eventual undoing of the Imperial Japanese Navy. So let's begin with our guides, Captain Mitsuo Fuchida and Commander Masatake Okumiya. These weren't just historians looking back, they were active participants, deeply embedded in the events they describe. Fuchida, for instance, actually led the air assault on Pearl Harbor, and he was present at Midway aboard the carrier Akagi.
He was right there. And Okumiya, a seasoned aviator himself, dedicated years after the war to meticulously researching the battle, even questioning fellow former officers to piece together the full picture. Their shared purpose in writing this book was, I think, to finally reveal what they called the full story of this catastrophic defeat, a story that, for too long, had been largely shrouded in secrecy, even within the Japanese Navy itself.
That's incredible.
And one of the most striking insights comes from Okumiya's profound conviction that the entire Pacific War was fundamentally misunderstood by its architects. He believed it was a war started by men who did not understand the sea and fought by men who did not understand the air.
Wow. That's quite a statement.
It really is. This sentiment that Japan judged sea by land standards and applied land concepts to air warfare isn't just a critique, it's a foundational observation that really sets the stage for everything that unfolds. It's a powerful warning, really, against applying outdated paradigms to new challenges.
It's a fascinating starting point. Before we dive into the battle itself, we really need to understand the strategic backdrop, because the seeds of Midway were sown long before. For decades, the Imperial Japanese Navy had conceptually geared its strength against the U.S. Navy, focusing on achieving what they called qualitative superiority to offset America's quantitative might. Their motto was incredibly powerful. We rely not upon the enemy's not attacking us, but upon our readiness to meet him when he comes.
Given that ambitious motto, it does beg the question, how truly ready was Japan for the conflict that lay ahead? What's remarkable is that even back in the Naval War College, Fuchida himself was something of an iconoclast. He famously argued that if war with the U.S. was truly inevitable, Japan should decide when to fight and then build its forces specifically for that decisive moment.
So take the initiative.
Exactly. But more significantly, he declared quite presciently that aircraft will be the decisive factor and that conventional surface strength, like battleships, would become largely ornamental.
Ahead of his time.
Way ahead. His colleagues, unfortunately, largely dismissed this as an all-powerful Air Force fantasy. This early dismissal of air power's true potential isn't just a historical footnote, it's a timeless lesson, isn't it? On the danger of dismissing disruptive technologies. Countless organizations make that mistake even today, clinging to old paradigms.
It's incredible to see that foresight dismissed so early. Fast forward to 1941, and the air in Tokyo was thick with tension. The naval leadership found itself at a crossroads, facing an impossible dilemma, really. Most leaders, including the formidable Admiral Yamamoto, were actually inclined towards peace. Yamamoto famously warned that the fleet couldn't fight successfully for more than a year or so against America's industrial might.
Right, he saw the writing on the wall regarding a long war.
But the tightening Anglo-Dutch-American oil embargo, which threatened to deplete Japan's vital oil reserves in just 3 to 4 years, well, that effectively pushed Japan into a corner. It made war seem almost inevitable.
And this situation raises a crucial question. How much did desperation drive strategy? The authors really highlight how this dire situation forced a fundamental shift, moving Japan from a purely defensive posture near their homeland to a far more aggressive, multi-front war aimed at securing those critical oil resources.
A huge strategic pivot.
Massive. But within this, a major divergence of opinion arose between the orthodox, more cautious Naval General Staff and the audacious combined fleet, led by the visionary, some might say reckless, Admiral Yamamoto.
This clash of titans in Japanese planning led directly to the initial war strategy. The Naval General Staff, they wanted to commit their main strength to a southward thrust for oil, then intercept the U.S. fleet in the Western Pacific, more or less on their own terms.
The more conservative approach.
Right, but Admiral Yamamoto, ever the gambler, had a far bolder, more devastating vision. A surprise assault on Pearl Harbor, launched concurrently with the southern operations to neutralize the U.S. Pacific Fleet up front. Basically, prevent any immediate counter-response.
This bold vision was indeed the genesis of the Pearl Harbor attack, a concept refined by brilliant strategists like Rear Admiral Takejiro Enishi and the renowned air tactician Commander Minoru Genda of Genda Circus fame, a nickname he earned for his innovative, often daring air tactics.
Genda Circus, I like that.
Their conditions for success were clear. Dedicate all 6 large carriers and maintain absolute secrecy. However, if we connect this to the bigger picture, many astute naval leaders, including Admiral Nagumo himself, harbored significant reservations. They viewed it as far too much of a gamble, highlighting the inherent vulnerability of carriers in such a daring operation. This early trepidation about carrier vulnerability is a thread that runs right through to Midway,
Interesting. The attack on Pearl Harbor was, undeniably, a huge tactical success, sinking or heavily damaging multiple U.S. battleships. But for the more forward-thinking Japanese air staff and the flying officers, the failure to find and destroy the American carriers, that was a bitter pill to swallow. They wanted a follow-up strike.
They really did. But their desire was thwarted by logistical issues, specifically the tanker train being on a prearranged northern route, making refueling difficult. Nagumo's ultimate decision to withdraw, citing satisfied damage and unknown enemy carrier locations, left a strategic void, a void that would haunt them. What's truly astonishing here, though, is the immediate Japanese complacency that settled in post-Pearl Harbor. They gloated over the spectacular destruction of battleships, largely ignoring the critical absence of any carrier gills.
Focusing on the wrong metric, almost.
Exactly. It was a Minoru Genda, recognizing the carrier as the new, undisputed king of naval warfare, who first conceived the idea of luring the enemy out by invading Midway, the very operation that would later lead directly to their catastrophic downfall. It's a stark example of how celebrating a partial victory can obscure a more profound strategic failure.
So with their initial objectives apparently achieved, Japan faced this pivotal strategic decision: consolidate their gains or continue the offensive. Combined fleet, under Admiral Ugaki and Yamamoto, pushed relentlessly for an eastward advance towards Hawaii, seeing it as the most damaging blow to the U.S. They even confidently calculated a formidable 3.1 carrier advantage going into the next engagement.
They felt pretty confident at that point.
Meanwhile, the more conservative Naval General Staff debated an Australia-first strategy, but the Army's reluctance to commit significant forces ultimately limited those ambitions.
And this period truly reveals deep, worrying cracks within Japanese strategic thinking. The Naval General Staff, to their credit, specifically warned against the Midway operation. They cited severe shortages in aircraft and air material, noting it would be impossible to adequately re-equip Nagumo's depleted air groups in time.
A practical, logistical warning.
Absolutely. And then came the Doolittle raid in April 1942, U.S. carrier planes bombing Tokyo. This seemingly minor raid inflicted very little physical damage, but its psychological impact on Yamamoto. Wow. His pride was deeply cut by the perceived failure of Homeland Defense. The authors note it steeled his determination to immediately destroy the U.S. carrier forces at Midway. It just shows how even a small, symbolic attack can have disproportionate strategic consequences, especially if it strikes at a commander's core ego.
That's fascinating. The Japanese confidence, however, it bordered on outright arrogance, almost a delusion by this point. In their pre-battle war games on the super battleship, Yamato, the presiding officer, Admiral Ugaki, brazenly manipulated results. Imagine this: a sunk Japanese carrier would be arbitrarily unsunk with a wave of his hand, creating this false, comforting sense of invincibility.
It sounds almost comical, but it's terrifyingly real.
It is. And this self-deception had tragic consequences. Adding to this fatal self-deception, the Battle of Coral Sea, just weeks before Midway, while proclaimed a Japanese victory, actually eliminated two of Nagumo's crucial carriers, Shokaku and Zukaku, due to damage and, importantly, pilot losses.
Heavy pilot losses they couldn't easily replace.
Right. The U.S. Yorktown, by stunning contrast, was repaired in a miraculous 2 days at Pearl Harbor and was ready for Midway. A striking example of American ingenuity versus Japan's what the authors called lackadaisical effort in repairs and replenishment.
This just raises the question, how could they be so blind? Their intelligence failures leading up to Midway were absolutely profound. Operation K, the aerial reconnaissance of Pearl Harbor crucial for Midway, failed because U.S. ships were already at the designated refueling point.
Bad timing.
Terrible timing. Submarine cordons meant to detect the approaching U.S. fleet were delayed and out of position. Crucially, even when Yamato's intelligence unit detected significant U.S. activity around Hawaii just before the battle, combined fleets sent no warning to Nagumo.
No warning. Why?
The underlying assumption, tragically shared by the Naval General Staff, was that the enemy would be loath to meet our fleet and would refuse to come out from his base. This arrogant underestimation of American resolve and capability was utterly catastrophic. It's a classic case study, really, of confirmation bias leading to disaster.
So against this backdrop of overconfidence and poor intelligence, the Japanese fleet, the largest ever assembled, a staggering force. Over 200 ships, 700 planes, 11 battleships, 8 carriers sorted from home waters, confident of smashing the enemy single-handed. Fuchida himself, recovering in Akagi's sick bay from appendicitis, observed Admiral Nagumo closely. He recalled Nagumo's former vigor but noted his present conservatism and passiveness, a general failing where commanders relied excessively on their staff, losing their own decisive edge.
Interesting observation from Fuchida. The fateful day, June 4th, began with a series of critical Japanese missteps. Nagumo's search planes, absolutely vital for locating the enemy, were launched late. Some even experienced mechanical issues. This reflects an ingrained overemphasis on attack rather than thorough reconnaissance in the Japanese Navy's doctrine. Remember, they didn't have dedicated carrier-borne reconnaissance planes. Their attack aircraft pulled double duty, which compromised their primary mission, a doctrinal flaw that cost them dearly.
That lack of dedicated recon is key. And then came the moment that changed everything. At 07.28, the Tone No. 4 search plane, which was already a half-hour late, it sighted 10 ships, apparently enemy, 240 miles from Midway. This news, after so much confidence and preparation, hit Nagumo, Fuchida recalled, like a bolt from the blue.
You can imagine. What followed was a period of agonizing uncertainty. The initial report from Tone No. 4 didn't specify carriers, leading to a glimmer of false hope. Then, at 08.09, a follow-up message said 5 cruisers, 5 destroyers, causing a collective sigh of relief on Akagi's bridge. But just 11 minutes later, at 08.2, came the chilling update. Enemy force accompanied by what appears to be aircraft carrier bringing up the rear.
It appears to be.
Exactly. That agonizing phrase, appears to be, created fatal doubt, contributing to the indecision that followed. The lack of clear, unambiguous intelligence at this critical juncture proved devastating.
Nagumo now faced an almost impossible choice. His planes were in this quick-change artist state, half rearmed with bombs for a second strike on Midway, not the torpedoes needed for ships.
Wrong ordnance for the job.
Totally. His Zeros, his precious fighter escorts, were already aloft, fighting incoming attacks from Midway-based aircraft. To launch immediately meant sending unescorted dive bombers against a potentially carrier-led force and leaving a vulnerable, rearming second wave completely exposed on deck.
His decision, made shortly after 08.30, was to recover the returning Midway strike first, then fully rearm with torpedoes, and finally retire northward to reorganize for an all-out attack. This was, by orthodox naval doctrine, a perfectly logical, safe decision, but it completely neglected the crucial time factor.
Time was everything.
As the authors put it so powerfully, victory in battle does not always go to the stronger. It often goes to the side which is quicker to act boldly and decisively to meet unforeseen developments. Nagumo's adherence to orthodoxy in a fluid, rapidly changing situation spelled doom.
And at 09.18, the hammer fell. U.S. dive bombers, after a near-miraculous journey and, well, a bit of luck, found the Japanese carriers at their most vulnerable. The deck of the Akagi was a chaotic scene of fueled and armed planes. It took 2 direct hits, leading to devastating internal explosions. Nagumo was forced to transfer his flag, his command structure, in disarray.
A nightmare scenario. Kaga and Soryu suffered similar horrific fates. Captain Yanagimoto of Soryu, a symbol of tragic devotion to duty, chose to go down with his ship.
Incredible bravery, but so tragic.
Only Hiryu remained. In a valiant, desperate effort, she launched 2 counterattacks against the U.S. Yorktown, which the Japanese mistakenly believed to be 2 different carriers due to the swift and ingenious U.S. repair scoring hits that ultimately doomed the American carrier.
A final, defiant strike.
But Hiryu, too, was eventually overwhelmed by U.S. planes. Like Yanagimoto, Admiral Yamaguchi, the commander of the Hiryu and Soryu Division, chose to go down with his sinking ship. A final act of samurai-like honor in the face of insurmountable defeat.
From his distant flagship Yamato, Admiral Yamamoto received the grim news. His initial disbeliefs quickly turned to black despair. Yet, in a testament to his desperation maybe, he issued this strangely optimistic order for a night engagement with his surface fleet.
Clutching at straws, perhaps?
Perhaps hoping to boost morale or snatch some kind of victory from the jaws of defeat. But hope faded quickly. The Naval General Staff in Tokyo, despite their earlier reservations, knew the operation was doomed. They feared Yamamoto's desperation might lead to even more suicidal orders, only for his chief of staff, Ugaki, the same Ugaki who had manipulated the war games, to bravely reject a suicidal battleship bombardment of Midway.
Interesting turn from Ugaki there.
Yamamoto then took personal responsibility for the defeat, a somber end to his aggressive vision.
The retreat itself was messy, costly. The Mikuma and Mogami cruisers collided in the chaos and were subsequently destroyed by relentless U.S. air attacks, despite valiant efforts. And the irony here, it's a profound one, is that the Japanese submarine I-168, considered a relatively minor player in the overall Japanese force, later found and delivered the coup de grace to the Yorktown.
The ship they thought they'd already sunk twice.
Exactly. It highlights the persistent intelligence disconnect right up to the very end.
This whole deep dive just compels us to ask, what really doomed Japan at Midway, beyond the immediate tactical errors of that fateful day? The authors, with their unique vantage point, provide a stark and unsparing analysis of the systemic flaws.
Yeah, they pinpoint several crucial, overarching factors that go far beyond any single mistake. First, the enduring myth of the almighty battleship. Japan poured immense resources into constructing super battleships like the Yamato, clinging desperately to World War I tactics and naval doctrine.
Even after Pearl Harbor.
Even after Pearl Harbor itself had definitively proved that air power was the decisive force in modern naval warfare. The U.S., by stark contrast, intelligently adapted its battleships for bombardment and critical carrier screening with advanced anti-aircraft capabilities. It's a classic example, really, of an empire investing in the past rather than the future.
Second, there was the profoundly mistaken naval air policy, tragically known as the crackman policy. This approach kept only the most elite, battle-hardened pilots constantly in active combat duty, believing their superior individual skill would guarantee victory.
Sounds good on paper, maybe.
But it meant Japan had no robust system for training new pilots, rotating experienced airmen into instruction, or creating a deep bench of reserves. When losses mounted, especially after the brutal Coral Sea battle just weeks before, there were simply no combat-ready replacements.
And that lack of pilot reserves crippled carriers like Zukaku before Midway even began. It was a strategy for a quick, decisive victory, not a prolonged attritional war of aerial combat, which is what they got.
Precisely. Third, and perhaps most damningly, was Japan's glaring technological backwardness. Most critically, the complete lack of radar.
The radar gap was huge.
Huge! And the bitter irony is that a Japanese professor, Dr. Hidetsugu Yagi, actually invented a vital component for radar technology, which the U.S. and Britain rapidly developed and deployed, while Japan stubbornly neglected it.
Incredible. Radar would have pierced the fog of war, detected enemy planes, located carriers far sooner. It could have altered the entire outcome.
It really could have. This points not just to a technological oversight, but maybe a cultural resistance to mass production and a slow adoption of necessary revolutionary improvements.
And finally, perhaps most profoundly, the authors speak of something even deeper. Arrogance and fundamental flaws in the Japanese national character that permeated their military culture. They describe an irrationality and impulsiveness, a provincialism leading to rigid dogma, a tendency to confuse desire and reality, and a general lack of maturity of mind when it came to assessing their own strengths and weaknesses.
That's a harsh self-assessment.
It is. They paint this vivid, disturbing picture of crews wearing light clothing despite fire risks, and bombs haphazardly piled on decks because of an almost childish overconfidence that the enemy will never hit our ships. It's a shocking level of strategic narcissism, really.
So you can see how Midway, The battle that doomed Japan offers more than just a historical account of a battle. It's a deeply introspective, almost agonizing look at a nation's military culture, the profound impact of strategic decision-making under unimaginable pressure, and, well, the human elements of arrogance and denial.
Absolutely. For you, the learner, this deep dive really highlights the critical importance of adaptable strategy, accurate and humble intelligence gathering, continuous innovation, and perhaps most vital of all, radical self-assessment. It's a powerful, timeless reminder that even the most spectacular victories can sow the seeds of future defeats as complacency, dogma, and a refusal to acknowledge reality are allowed to take root.
It certainly gives you pause, doesn't it? Perhaps the real battle that doomed Japan wasn't just fought in the skies and on the seas of Midway, but maybe in those war games, in the quiet planning rooms, in the hearts and minds of the leaders, long before a single shot was ever fired. A truly humbling thought, suggesting that the most dangerous enemy can often be found within.